If you always like that girl who plays hard to get and ignores you, or who only gives you crumbs while maybe the ones who actually want you don't interest you, then this video is for you. This is a problem that affects many men, and today we're going to analyze it thoroughly together. Because behind this frantic search for the perfect woman who, when you finally find her, rejects you and runs away, there's a very specific psychological dynamic at play, one that has to do with your attachment style, your need for control, and a distorted idea of love. Today, we'll understand why you're only attracted to women who don't want you, and most importantly, how to break this pattern in order to have healthier and more fulfilling relationships. If you don't know me, let me introduce myself. I'm Daniela Coin, an educator, professional, and Jungian coach specializing in men's personal and relational growth. So I help men feel better about themselves and, as a result, have more beautiful and healthier relationships with women. So let's start with attachment theory, which was developed by the psychologist John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. This theory explains how the emotional experiences we had in childhood influence the way we relate to people in our adult lives. If you don't know what attachment styles are, I'll leave a link to my video on this topic in the description below, but I'll briefly explain it here. Attachment styles describe the way adults emotionally relate to others, especially within romantic relationships. There are 4 main types of attachment styles. Secure, where a person experiences relationships with trust and stability, and 3 insecure types. Anxious, insecure, characterized by a constant need for reassurance and fear of abandonment. Avoidant, insecure, where one tends to avoid intimacy out of fear of losing their independence. And disorganized, insecure, which is a combination of anxiety and avoidance due to traumatic relational experiences. And these attachment styles are determined by the kind of relationship we had as children with our parents or primary caregivers. That is, those who experienced insecure attachment due to emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or unpredictable parents may develop a relational pattern based on anxiety, insecurity, and fear, and therefore a sense of dependence on or avoidance of their partner. In this specific case, referring to those who fall in love with someone who runs away, we can say that the person who chases almost always has an insecure, anxious attachment style. And as I was saying, those with an insecure, anxious attachment style tend to associate love with the idea of having to earn the other person's affection. Love, therefore, is not perceived as a natural and effortless experience, shared and equal, but rather as a challenge, an unstable territory where one must fight to gain recognition and attention. And this explains why there is often a stronger attraction to partners who are emotionally distant or unpredictable, in this case, women who run away. The lack of availability awakens a childhood dynamic where affection is uncertain and therefore becomes desirable. To explain it even more clearly and in even simpler words, if you learned as a child that love has to be chased because maybe your parents were emotionally unavailable and you had to run after them or beg for love to get their attention, then for you, even as an adult, love will work the same way. In other words, your subconscious learns that love is obtained by begging from people who run away. Obviously, your parents are not to blame. They acted that way not because they were bad, but simply because they themselves didn't really know how to give and receive love. So the person who runs away reminds you of a familiar feeling. If, on the other hand, someone is immediately affectionate with you, this openness is perceived as suspicious or even, at times, boring. Since there's no need to fight to get love, your interest tends to fade away. This is an unconscious mechanism, but it is very powerful and leads many people to unknowingly seek out elusive partners, ending up in relationships that clearly become unstable and frustrating, or in endless loves that never end and never reach a concrete conclusion. To break free from this dynamic, it is essential to recognize your own attachment style and heal it. If you're interested, I've also made a course on this topic, which I'll leave for you below in the description, along with a little discount code. It is also important to understand that love, true, genuine love, should not be a source of anxiety or insecurity, but rather a relationship based on stability and emotional reciprocity. So it's necessary to work on this aspect as well. And another fundamental aspect to consider, in addition to attachment styles that explain this dynamic, is also the one related to the need for control. Because when someone is openly interested in us, we are at an advantage. We have the power to decide whether to accept or reject their interest, and we are the ones in control, managing the pace of the relationship and thus also setting the boundaries of this interaction. This situation provides a sense of security because it prevents us from feeling vulnerable or exposed. On the other hand, if someone is elusive or inconsistent, so they don't know if they want us, one day they do, the next day they don't, then this causes our sense of control to diminish, and as a result, this need to regain our position is triggered. Attraction, therefore, in this case for the woman who runs away, is not necessarily tied to the person herself. It's not because you really like her, or because she's the best woman in the world, which she isn't, but rather it's connected to the need to re-establish a balance of power, so the need for control in order to feel secure. And this explains why relationships with people who want you are often experienced as not very stimulating or even boring, because they don't generate that adrenaline, the emotional tension linked to the chase. On the other hand, when a woman ignores you or pulls away, runs off or wants you but then doesn't, then wants you and then doesn't, your emotional system interprets all this distance as a kind of challenge to overcome. Your desire for her grows, but not because the other person is actually that interesting, but simply because her behavior threatens your sense of control and self-esteem. And this mechanism is particularly evident in people who, due to past experiences, have developed a strong emotional independence and struggle to allow themselves deep intimacy. In these cases, the possibility of a stable relationship is unconsciously experienced as a loss of autonomy, while chasing after someone elusive maintains the illusion of being free and not emotionally involved. And recognizing this pattern is the first step to overcoming it, because it's important to understand that real control doesn't lie in manipulating the dynamics of the relationship, but in consciously choosing the person with whom to build a healthy and balanced connection. And finally, there is a third hidden motivation behind the need to chase after the one who runs away. Because it may seem paradoxical, but falling in love with someone who doesn't reciprocate also brings a series of psychological benefits, that is, advantages, even unconscious ones. One of the advantages, for example, is related to the intense emotions you experience, because when you desire someone who is running away, your brain releases a combination of adrenaline and dopamine, as well as chemicals that intensify attraction and excitement. You feel alive. In fact, falling in love becomes a very stimulating, beautiful, pleasant, and fun experience that makes you feel more alive, more motivated, and often even more confident. Confident that you can make it, confident that you want to reach a goal, and so it activates a whole series of energies that are usually dormant. Another advantage is that when you're in love with someone unattainable, you tend to improve yourself in order to reach them. That is, you want to better yourself. You pay more attention to taking care of yourself, your physical appearance, to becoming more skilled, richer, more attractive, more capable. You do everything you can to maybe even be more interesting. You cultivate your interest to appear more attractive in the eyes of the other person. You show yourself to be more independent, or maybe you decide to live on your own if you still live with your parents. You do a whole series of things that in any case improve your life, because in the eyes of the person who is in some way challenging you to pursue them, you want to be as appealing as possible. However, this drive for self-improvement is often driven more by an external need for validation than by a genuine desire for personal growth. And this is something you should reflect on as well. And the third benefit, subtler but just as important, is that unrequited infatuation allows you to maintain a certain kind of freedom. Because when you're in love with someone who doesn't want you, you're not really involved in a relationship. Which means you don't have to deal with all the complexities of a relationship, the responsibilities of a real partnership. You fool yourself into thinking you want a relationship, but in reality, you avoid it because the risk of being vulnerable is too great. And this dynamic is often a reflection of an unconscious fear of intimacy. So in this case, there might also be an insecure and avoidant attachment style present. The idea of building a deep and lasting bond may sound appealing in theory to some people, but on a deeper level, it can be more frightening than they are willing to admit, and idealizing the unattainable person who might already be in a relationship or simply doesn't want you becomes an unconscious strategy to stay protected without having to face the fear of being hurt, disappointed, or abandoned. And to break this pattern, it's essential that you first understand that healthy love is absolutely not synonymous with suffering, nor with challenge and chasing, but is made up of reciprocity and shared well-being. So how do you break this vicious cycle? First of all, recognize this pattern. If you notice that every time a woman is interested in you, you lose interest, or every time someone doesn't want you, you become interested, then you need to ask yourself what it is you're really looking for. Am I looking for love, or am I looking for challenges? The second thing to do is to change your perspective. Because a stable relationship isn't boring, it's healthy, and you need to learn to appreciate, first and foremost with yourself, emotional tranquility instead of idolizing and constantly seeking tension. The third thing to do is to work on your self-esteem, because if you always go after those who run away, it might be that you're actually afraid of being truly loved, maybe because you're afraid you're not good enough. You need to learn to recognize that you have value without having to earn love. And finally, you might be someone who is living in an apathetic, depressed, or boring state, and therefore feels the need for challenges. So reflect on the fact that if you start to feel bored when a woman wants you, or in general, if you're never interested in the people who pursue you and only need those who run away, whether consciously or not, it's likely that you need new challenges in your life, something that energizes you and makes you feel alive, but not the woman who runs away. So maybe you can devote yourself to a sport, new projects, a job you enjoy, or personal growth. Because maybe you simply need excitement, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the negative kind that comes from someone who doesn't want you. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll leave the button here for you to subscribe, and here are 2 videos to explore these topics further.